Hi everyone, today we'll be discussing about strabismus or the squint. So coming to the definition of strabismus, strabismus is misalignment of the visual axis of the both eyes, or a condition in which the visual axis of the two eyes they do not meet at the point of object of regard. It means that the visual axis of the two eyes they are not in perfect alignment. So they are ideally the visual axis of the two eyes are parallel to each other in the primary position of gaze, and this is maintained in all the gazes. So any misalignment of the visual axis of the two eyes is called the squint. So as you know, what is orthophoria? So orthophoria usually mentioned in your clinical examination findings in coming when writing about ocular posture. You write both eyes are orthophoric. It means that there is a perfect alignment of the eyes. That is, both the visual axes are parallel to each other when the patient is seeing it in primary position of gaze. So this is orthophoria. So how do you test it? By putting a torchlight at a distance of 33 to 40 centimeter. When you shine a torchlight, if you see the light reflex which is at the center of the pupil, so it means that both the eyes are, it means that it is orthophoric. Ocular posture is orthophoric. So coming to the other terms like heterophoria and heterotropia. So heterophoria is nothing but the eye deviation tendency when the fusion is broken or blocked. See, ideally the eye will be in orthophoric position, but when the fusion is broken, like you close one eye or when there is a fatigue, the fusion will be broken and it will manifest. That is called latent squint. So what is manifest squint? It is nothing but misalignment of the visual axis. So they do not intersect at the point of fixation on all the during all the times. It's not like only when the fusion is broken. So heterotropia is manifest squint, whereas heterophoria is latent squint. So like you can see in this picture, like the left eye is deviated inwards. So it means that it is a heterotropia, and it is an esotropia where eye is deviated inwards. So it is a esotropia. If the eye is deviated outwards, it is called exotropia. If eye is deviated upwards, it is called hypertrophia. If eye is deviated downwards, it is called hypotropia. So this is a case of esotropia. So before coming to squint, you need to know something about extraocular muscles and their nerve supply, and I think it's already covered, and you know better. So the sixth nerve supplies the lateral rectus, the fourth nerve supplies the superior oblique, and all the recti and the inferior oblique are supplied by third nerve. So this innervation is important. Then coming to the origin of extraocular muscles, it is around the annulus of Zinn at the orbital apex. So all the recti, they are arising and they are getting inserted. Getting inserted in the sclera. So how many millimeter from the limbus they are getting inserted? This is important because some examiners might ask, because it's important from practical point of view. So medial rectus is inserted 5.5 millimeter from the limbus. Inferior rectus is inserted 6.5 millimeter from the limbus. The lateral rectus is inserted 6.9 millimeter from the limbus, and superior rectus 7.7 millimeter from the limbus. Especially medial rectus and superior rectus, you remember, because superior rectus, the shape of the superior rectus holding forceps, so the S shaped, which is at the edge, so that is around 7.7 millimeter. They ask because you have to hold the forceps at the limbus and bend and insert in a curved manner and hold the superior rectus. That's why this dimension is important. Then coming to medial rectus, because when you are doing a pterygium surgery, if it's a nasal pterygium, so you need to be careful that you shouldn't go more nasally, because it can damage the insertion of the medial rectus and finally lead to a secondary squint. So that's why the insertions of these muscles are important. Then coming to the action of the muscles, so medial rectus and lateral rectus, they have only one function. So medial rectus is a primary, since it is medially, it helps in adduction, that is towards the nose, movement towards the nose. Then lateral rectus abduction, that is away from the nose. Then superior rectus And all these superior and inferior recti and oblique, they have three functions. One is primary, secondary, and tertiary. So primary is superior rectus, definitely if it's in the superior recti, so it causes elevation. And secondary function is adduction, and tertiary function is intorsion. Similarly, inferior rectus, the primary function is depression, since it is in the inferior position. Then adduction and extorsion. So similarly, superior oblique is primary intortor, and secondary and tertiary functions are depression and abduction. And inferior oblique is an extortor, and its secondary and tertiary functions are elevation and abduction. So this you can keep to remember it. So any superiors, either it is a superior rectus or a superior oblique, they are intortors, and inferiors are extortors. Okay, so and any recti is adductors and obliques are abductors. So if you remember this, so you will be remembering the primary function you can remember, but the secondary and tertiary functions you can remember through this. Okay, so coming to ocular movements, so this cardinal, there are 6 cardinal positions and 9 cardinal positions. So I'll tell about the 6 cardinal positions. 6 cardinal positions uh, are the positions in which one muscle in each eye has to move the eye into that position as follows. Like see the dextroversion, wherein one muscle in both eye is moving the eye towards the right, so that is dextroversion. So then it is levoversion. Okay, then when both the eyes are moving to the left, that is levoversion. Similarly, you will have dextro elevation and dextro depression, levo elevation and levo depression. See all the extreme right and extreme left, all these comes under 6 cardinal positions. When even the center positions like is primary position, elevation and depression, when all this is included, it becomes 9 cardinal positions. So this is important. Whenever you are checking for extraocular movements, you need to do in this 9 cardinal position. So we will know the function of all the muscles if you check in all these 9 gazes. So 9 diagnostic positions, it includes the primary position and elevation and depression along with these 6 cardinal positions. So what are ductions and versions? When you are checking for extraocular movements, you need to mention ductions and versions are normal. Ductions are uniocular movements. So when you close one eye and ask the patient to look in all the 4, like elevation, depression, adduction and abduction, these are ductions. There are 4 ductions. Similarly, you need to check both eyes separately. And versions are always binocular movements. So in binocular movements, you will have 2 types. One is versions and another is vergences. So versions are nothing but simultaneous conjugate movements. Okay, when both eyes are moving in particular direction, either to the right or to the left or elevation or different, these are versions. Okay, vergences are binocular simultaneous movements. They are also binocular movements, but they are disconjugate movements. Disconjugate means one is moving to the right, one is moving to the left. So the example in case of convergence, when you are converging, so the right eye is moving to the left eye is moving to the right. So both eyes are converging at a point, but they are disconjugate movements. So convergence and divergence, they come under disconjugate movements or vergences. So some terminologies you need to know. One is antagonist. So what is antagonist? So muscles of the same eye moving the eye in opposite direction, like medial rectus and lateral recti. So these are antagonist muscles, superior rectus and inferior rectus. So they are muscles within the same eye, but they are moving in opposite direction. Like medial rectus is causing adduction, whereas lateral rectus is causing abduction. So superior rectus is causing elevation, inferior rectus is causing depression. So these are muscles within the same eye, but they are causing opposite. They are causing movement in opposite direction. So what is synergies? Synergies are muscles of the same eye, but which are helping to move in the same direction. For example, if you take superior rectus and inferior oblique in the same eye, both are causing elevation. So the superior rectus and inferior oblique both are causing elevation. Similarly, the inferior rectus and superior oblique both are causing depression. So these are synergists. So these are synergists. Then coming to yoke muscles. So yoke muscles, they are muscles of both the eyes, like both the right and left eye, but helping them to move in the same direction. So these are yoke muscles. Like example, like if the patient wants to see dextroversion, in dextroversion the right lateral rectus and the left medial rectus have to move towards the right. So these are yoke muscles. So why are these important? Because of the innervation to these muscles have to happen in such a way so that they help in felicitating these versions and vergences properly. Like there's something called Sherrington's law and Herring's law. So what is Sherrington's law? Sherrington's law is increase in innervation to one muscle causes decreased innervation to its antagonist. So example, if the patient has to see to the right, so your right lateral rectus, there must be innervation to the right lateral rectus, but there should be inhibition to the medial rectus, otherwise the eye will be pulled medially. So when you have to see in one direction, there will be increased innervation to muscle, to one muscle, and there will be decreased innervation to its antagonist. So this is called Sherrington's law. So similarly, there is something called Herring's law. Herring's law is equal innervation to the yoke muscles. Yoke muscles are nothing but muscles from both eyes which help in movement in the same direction. So this is Herring's law of equal innervation is important. So when the eye has to look towards one side, there must be equal innervation to the yoke muscles. Okay, so this is Herring's law. For that you need to know yoke muscles and yoke muscles, antagonists, all this you need to know. So coming to the classification of squint. So squint, I think almost they have asked for a short note all the questions. So they ask a short note about pseudostrabismus. So coming to the classification of squint, so one is pseudostrabismus, which is not squint at all, but it is mistaken to be squint because of the apparent appearance of the eyes. Then next is heterophorias or latent squint, which is manifested only when you break the fusion between both eyes. And another one is heterotropia or manifest squint. Again, manifest squint and heterotropia are divided into concomitant squint and incomitant squint, that we'll be discussing later. So what is pseudostrabismus? Pseudostrabismus is a condition in which the visual axes are in fact parallel, but the eyes seem to have a squint. Like it might be because of the of few reasons, like increased intercanthal distance, or a prominent epicanthal fold, or there is something called negative the angle of kappa, so which is negative or positive. Because of this you can have a pseudo esotropia or pseudo exotropia, that you need to remember. So here there is no apparent squint, but they appear to be squinted mainly because of some anatomical positions of the eyeball or anatomical aspects, like there can be a prominent epicanthal fold or increased intercanthal disc, widely separated eyeballs, or something called negative and positive angle kappa. So coming to heterophoria. So heterophoria is nothing but a latent strabismus in which the tendency of the eye to deviate is kept latent by fusion. Okay, so therefore when the influence of the fusion is broken, the visual axis of one eye will deviate and the squint will manifest. So this is heterophoria. Then heterotropia is nothing but a manifest squint. Then in that again it is divided into concomitant and incomitant squint. So coming to concomitant strabismus, now we'll be discussing about concomitant strabismus. So concomitant strabismus is the misaligned eyes, they maintain the abnormal relationship in all the directions of the gaze, or the amount of the deviation in the eye, squinting eye, will remain constant in all the directions of the gaze, and there is no associated limitation of ocular movements. Both are important, wherein the amount of deviation is constant in all the gazes. So you have to see in all the gazes, all the 9 cardinal gazes which I have told, and the amount of squint in the squinting eye will remain same in all the gazes, and there is no limitation of the ocular movements. So this is concomitant squint. So concomitant squint is classified is divided into esotropia, exotropia, and vertical squint. So coming to Esotropia or convergent squint. So convergent squint, like I told you, it means that inward deviation of one eye. So this is convergent squint. So it is a most common type of squint which is seen in children. It can be unilateral, one eye, or it can be both eye alternating. Again, the convergent squint, so they might ask as a short note like classification of convergent squint or something. So again, the convergent squint is divided into 5 types. So first is infantile esotropia. So infantile esotropia is nothing but it means it is present since birth. Usually they present within 6 months of birth, and they'll have a large angle of deviation, more than 30-degree angle of deviation they'll have. And how do you treat it? Treat it as amblyopia management, because the child will be having this misalignment. So one eye would have gone for amblyopia. Amblyopia we'll be discussing in the next class. So just remember, first is amblyopia management, and the definitive line of management is surgery in case of infantile esotropia, because there is no other method. So usually you have to wait for some time until there is a development, and you have to do early, because it can lead to permanent amblyopia. So it should be done between 6 months to 2 years. And the method and the surgery which is done is recession and resection procedure, both eye resection, both eye medial rectus resection, or one eye unilateral recession and resection procedure. But most preferred is a recession of medial rectus in both eyes. I will be telling what is recession and resection later. So coming to other type of convergent squint, so that is accommodative esotropias. Accommodative esotropias are nothing but they are because of increased convergence. So because of the increased demand in the convergence, example in hypermetropes, because of increased convergence, because of their high hypermetropia, they'll have increased convergence. Okay, so this is called refractive accommodative esotropias. And there is something called non-refractive accommodative esotropia, wherein it is because of increased convergence to accommodation ratio, that is called AC by A ratio. Ideally, for some amount of accommodation, there will be some amount of accommodative convergence. But if the accommodative convergence is more when compared to the accommodation, it is called high AC by A ratio. So in this they won't be having refractive errors, but it is mainly because of the high accommodative convergence to accommodation ratio. So then there is something called mixed accommodative, wherein both the components of the refractive and non-refractive component are there. So this comes under accommodative esotropias. So these can be easily corrected with the glasses. So accommodative esotropias, if you are putting a hypermetrope, if you are asking him to wear the glasses, the squint will automatically get corrected. And even in case of non-refractive accommodative esotropias, if you are giving a bifocal, it will get corrected. Then coming to, there is something called acquired non-accommodative esotropias, again for which we need to do surgeries. Then sensory esotropia. Sensory esotropia or exotropia, you need to remember. So they result from defective vision. Okay, defective vision of the eye. It could be because of cataract or some retinal pathology. The patient is not able to see. That's why they are having esotropia. So consecutive esotropia, so it results from surgical overcorrection of exotropia. So the sensory and consecutive both are same in esotropia and exotropia. So one thing you remember in types of esotropia, one is infantile esotropia, that is they are presenting at an early stage of birth, like within 6 months. And definitive management is surgical. Then accommodative esotropias, it is mainly because of increased accommodation, example in case of hypermetropes. So because for them they'll have problem for the near vision, they try to accommodate and they try to see, so they'll have accommodative esotropias. So that is refractive accommodative esotropias. There is something called non-refractive accommodative esotropia, where they have more convergence when compared to the accommodation, that leads to esotropia. Then acquired non-accommodative esotropias. Then sensory esotropia, it is due to defective vision in that eye. It could be because of anything like cataract or a retinal problem, anything. Because of that, the eye is going for esotropia. So sensory exotropia is more common, but esotropia can also happen. Then consecutive is nothing but secondary to the correction of exotropia. secondary to surgery, exotropia, the eye is going for esotropia. So this is the consecutive. So even in exotropia, the classification for you have both the sensory exotropia and consecutive exotropia and infantile exotropia, you need to remember. So coming to the divergent squint or exotropia, so the classification, like I told you, it is a condition where there is an outward deviation of the eye. Like you can see in the right eye, there is outward deviation of the eye. So classification again, it comes under congenital exotropia. Secondary and consecutive are there. So it is not secondary, it is sensory. Sorry, there is a mistake. Then there is something called primary infantile exotropia in case of divergent squint. That you need to remember. Primary exotropia, not primary infantile. Primary exotropia. So this primary exotropia, so it may be unilateral or it may be alternating. It is a most common type of divergent squint. This primary exotropia is a most common type of divergent squint. Usually it occurs at the age of 2 to 5 years. So initially the patient will have a latent exotropia. It is called heterophoria. So then the patient will manifest as the age progresses. Okay, so this is primary exotropia. So secondary or sensory deprivation or sensory, both are same. So it is a constant unilateral deviation which results from long standing lesions within the eye. It could be because of cataract, or it could be because of any retinal problem or macular problem or retinal, anything. It can lead to secondary or sensory exotropia. Consecutive is nothing but overcorrection of esotropia can lead to exotropia. So how do you evaluate a squint? In squint, always history is very important. So you need to know whether it is a congenital or acquired or any surgery, history of previous surgery or any other lesions or family history. All this has to be taken. Then coming to the ocular movements to know the muscles function, whether it is a concomitant squint or incomitant squint. For that you need to check for ocular movements, then check for pupillary reactions, then the ocular fundus examination. That is important because it could be a sensory or secondary squint. So for that you need to rule out any other existing conditions. Then vision and refractive errors in case of accommodative esotropias. Then for squint there is some particular evaluation. There are few tests. So these are cover tests, both direct and alternate cover tests. Then Hirschberg's test. So this is the most common test you will be doing with a torchlight. For you people, Hirschberg's test, right reflex test, corneal right reflex test is important. That is the same thing which I told you. When you shine a torchlight, if you see the pupillary reflex at the center of the pupils, it means the eye is orthophoric. But if it is anywhere anywhere not other than the center of the pupil, anywhere at the border of the pupil or between the limbus and the pupillary margin or at the limbus or away from that, so based on that we can approximately grade the amount of squint. That is a Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. Then prism bar cover test, then Krimsky test. So and synaptophore test. These are the tests which we have to do for squint evaluation. Like I told you, this is the Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. So in this you can see in the first picture the corneal reflex is at the border of the pupil. In the right eye it is at the border of the pupil. So approximately the squint is around 15 degree. If the corneal reflex is at the limbus, like you can see in the other picture, you can see the corneal reflex, the eye is deviated outwards, the left eye is deviated outwards, and you can see the corneal reflex is at the limbus, that is 45 degree exotropia. And if anywhere between the pupillary margin and the limbus, that is called 30 degree. So this is approximately they tell 1 millimeter of deviation of the eye can lead to 7 degree of squint. And this degree is 1 degree is equal to 2 prism diopter. So if you measure with a prism bar cover test, so if the patient is having 15 degree squint, it means that 30 degree prism diopter squint he is having. Okay, so either you can mention in degree or prism diopter, but remember, so 1 millimeter deviation will lead to 7 degree of squint. So this is the Hirschberg's corneal reflex test. So they might ask you about the evaluation of squint. You just need to mention the Hirschberg's test, the prism bar cover test, the Krimsky test, and a measurement through synaptophore. Okay. Then coming to goals of the management of squint. So main goal is to achieve good cosmetic correction, to improve, definitely to improve the visual acuity, and to maintain binocular single vision. Yeah. So why we are bothered about the squint, why we are bothered about the deviation is because both eye, I mean all the people like who are, I mean all the creatures which are having both eyes in perfect alignment, it is mainly because we are having a good, because of that we are having a good stereopsis or good depth perception. So there are three components in the binocular single vision, that is a simultaneous perception. You are seeing images from both eyes simultaneously, and you are fusing the images. Because of that you are having a depth perception or 3D dimension of vision. So otherwise because of in patients who are having strabismus, they'll have problem with the depth perception or stereopsis. So as well as because of the deviation in the eye, and the image is not falling on the retina, on the macula, on the center. So there can be, I mean because of that the image won't be clear, and that image is carried to the brain, and because of that the eye will finally develop amblyopia, or it will become weaker. Okay, so the main goal is to maintain the binocular vision. Along with that, the secondary aim should be in good cosmetic correction and to improve the visual acuity. So the treatment modalities, like if the patient is having some refractive errors, we need always to correct the refractive errors. And if the patient is having amblyopia, that is defective vision without any abnormalities, so we need to do a occlusion therapy. Occlusion therapy is nothing but patching the eye, and patching the normal eye and allowing the weaker eye to see. And so finally because of increased stimulation of that, the patient might improve. So this is occlusion therapy. Then orthoptic exercise, there are a few active exercises to which will make the patient to fuse the images, and there are few exercises which will help in developing binocular single vision. And finally squint surgery for few cases like infantile esotropia or infantile exotropia, or I mean other things, that we have to do a squint surgery and post-operative orthoptic exercises. So coming to the squint surgery, like I told you, they should be instituted only after the correction of the refractive errors and the treatment of amblyopia. Only after that we need to do correction. So there are two principles in squint surgery. One is recession and another is resection. So these are two recessions are nothing but they are to weaken the strong muscle by recessing. So here recession means shifting the insertion posteriorly. Like you can see in this picture, we are shifting the muscle insertion posteriorly and we are weakening the muscle. Or there is something called resection, where we are strengthening the weaker muscle by shortening the muscle. That is, we are cutting the muscle and we are shortening the muscle. That is resection. So only in resection we are cutting the muscle and we are shortening the muscle to strengthen the muscle. So in a recession procedure, the muscle is cut from the surface of the eye and reattached further back from the front of the eye. This is a recession procedure. Okay, so in a resection procedure, a segment of the muscle is removed from the extraocular muscle and the shortened extraocular muscle is then reattached. So you need to remember, only in resection, after a resection, the extraocular muscle has not changed position as in recession. The only difference is the shorter length of the extraocular muscle. So this is the difference between recession and resection. Recession means you are removing the muscle from its insertion and inserting it posteriorly. So you are weakening the muscle. Whereas in case of resection, you are cutting the muscle and you are attaching in the same position. This is resection, or you are strengthening the muscle. So coming to incomitant squint or paralytic squint. So incomitant is not synonymous with the paralytic, but most common type of incomitant squint is paralytic squint. So what is incomitant squint? It is a type of squint in which the amount of deviation varies in different directions of the gazes. It is not constant, and it can be associated with extraocular movements abnormality. Okay, so the amount of deviation is not constant, so that's why it is called incomitant squint. And the different types are paralytic squint, restrictive squint. So this you need to remember. So paralytic squint is the most common type of incompetent, but there is something called restrictive squint and AV pattern squints also. So paralytic squint, when there is a paralysis of one or more extraocular muscles, that's why we need to know about the extraocular muscle nerve supply. So when there is a third nerve palsy or sixth nerve palsy or fourth nerve palsy, so whatever type of squint you are developing, that comes under this paralytic squint. Okay, then what comes under restrictive are some restrictive myopathies. In case of thyroid myopathy, all this comes under restrictive type of squint. So how do you differentiate this? This is a commonly asked question. How do you differentiate paralytic from a non-paralytic squint? So paralytic, it can be because of weakness of extraocular muscles, and so the deviation will be different in different cases of gaze. And since it is mostly acquired, the patient will be having diplopia. So because one eye image is falling on the macula, other eye image is falling outside, and since it is acquired, the patient will be having diplopia. So in case of non-paralytic squint, they won't have diplopia. Here the ocular movements will be restricted in the case of paralysis. Example, the patient is having a lateral rectus palsy. So because the lateral rectus, the innervation has been cut off, so the eye won't be, we can't move the eye in that direction. So here there will be restriction of the action of the paralyzed muscle, whereas in case of committed squint, the movements will be normal. So coming to the cover test, so secondary deviation is more than primary deviation, you just remember this. Then compensatory head posture. So since this paralytic squint is acquired, they will have a compensatory head posture, especially in case of superior oblique palsy, they'll have a head tilt. So whereas in non-paralytic squint, it is absent. And paralytic squint is usually sudden, whereas this non-paralytic squint is usually gradual. It can be from birth or gradually it will be progressive. And other neurological findings, they are common in case of paralytic squint because it is associated with the nerve palsies, whereas non-paralytic squint, no neurological findings will be present. And paralytic squint, they can be associated with nausea and vertigo because the raised intracranial tension or sixth nerve palsy leading to false localizing sign, they can have a vertigo and nausea. So whereas they are absent in non-paralytic squint. So these are the differentiating features between paralytic squint and non-paralytic squint. So one is the main definition, the amount of squint is different in different directions of the ways, whereas in committed squint or non-paralytic, it is equal in all directions of gaze. And diplopia will be present in case of paralytic squint. You just remember some nerve palsy like sixth nerve palsy or third nerve palsy. So in third nerve palsy, the eye will be inwards, and sixth nerve palsy, eye will be outwards. So in third nerve palsy, the eye will be out and down, whereas in sixth nerve palsy, the eye will be in because it is not able to, lateral rectus is not functioning. So diplopia will be present, and extraocular movements will be limited on the side of the paralyzed muscle. Then cover test, if you do, secondary deviation will be more than primary deviation. And in few types of if it is a superior oblique involved, they can have a compensatory head posture. Then onset will be usually sudden, and they can be associated with some other neurological findings. So this is about paralytic squint. Then restrictive squint, there is nothing much. It is the extraocular muscles is not paralyzed in this, but they are mechanically restricted. So most common is thyroid ophthalmopathy. There are a few other conditions like Duane's retraction syndrome, Brown's, then incarceration of the extraocular muscles in case of blowout fracture. Even that comes under restrictive strabismus. So this is about incompetent squint. So a little bit you need to know about the strabismus surgery, that what is a recession and what is a resection. So that's it. So we'll read about the squint. So we'll be discussing about amblyopia and nystagmus if possible in the next class. Okay. So thank you.